this schedule really shapes up for a playoff run with a 12-team playoff.
Areas that, you need to get from experience, which is just, hey, I need to make quicker decisions.
How do you define success for this team?
National championship.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here of the Cover 3 College Ball Podcast. It's the Summer School Series, and today we're keeping it in state, going down to Miami inside the U with David Lake. David, welcome back to the show, man.
Good to be on with you, Bud. Always enjoy it every year. Let's do it again.
Let's do it, man. So strong year for Miami last year. Starting to see more proof of concept with kind of why they hired Mario Cristobal. Nice to have the best quarterback in the country in Cam Ward, an offense that put up a ton of points. Defense at times didn't live up to the bargain, and they'll look to improve on that this year. What's kind of the vibe right now in Coral Gables?
I think it's a mix of kind of what you're alluding to. I think everyone's pleased with the step forward, right? Miami is, previous to this year, they'd only won 10 games in the regular season one time in the previous 20 years. So they did accomplish that. They took a nice step forward as a program. I think there's more to even sell. Mario's huge on recruiting. There's more to sell, that things are on the right trajectory. And I think all those things are absolutely true. But when you boil it down to, assessing what Miami got out of this group in 2024, I think, people in the building will acknowledge that they underachieved and should have been in Charlotte for the ACC championship game. And if they did that, they would have been in the 12-team college football playoff. So it's one of those situations where both things are true. Good step forward, overall a good season, but still, disappointing with the way things finished there with, November losses to Georgia Tech and Syracuse.
They go out and get Carson Beck in the transfer portal, who obviously had the Tommy John surgery following the SEC championship game. What did they see in Beck when he was healthy that made them convinced he's the guy for them?
I think they feel like he's a very talented passer. I think, glass half full. They look at, they feel like their passing system, Shannon Dawson's passing offense, has air raid principles. They feel like it's much easier for quarterbacks to plug in and produce in a big way. They feel like it's an easier offense than what he was leading at Georgia, just from a schematics and what they ask of their quarterback standpoint. Also, too, Carson Beck, played an SEC schedule. He was a 2-year starter at Georgia. I think his record ended up being 24-3 as a starter. So he went against big-time defenses, all season long. Is he going to see that in the ACC as much? No. So they feel like, look, he's a talented player. And I think, last year he didn't live up to those expectations of being the number 1 overall pick that he entered the season with. But I think Miami feels like, look, he's still an NFL draftable quarterback. Where is that exactly? Is that a 3rd-round pick? Is that a 5th-round pick? Is that a 7th-round pick? Who knows? But he's a very talented player. And look, but frankly, there was kind of similar talk in terms of skepticism, and I think the skepticism's fair in both instances. There was skepticism last year at this time with Cam Ward. What's that really going to look like? Is he going to be able to protect the football? How talented is he? Can he elevate a place like Miami? He went and did that. I think there is optimism after getting to know Carson Beck the last 6 months that he is a very bright football mind. They've been blown away by his football intelligence. And if everything stays on track with his recovery from the elbow surgery, they feel like they're going to have one of the better quarterbacks in the country.
So the guys he was throwing to at Georgia was a major drop-off, even starting the season from what they had in 23. Yeah. And then in 24, Georgia lost both their outside receivers to domestic violence arrests or at least suspensions, from that. So they were having to run guys you and I have seen Arian Smith a bunch. He was a high school kid. He can't really run routes. He's more just like a gadget. Hey, I'm super fast type guy. And he was just getting targeted nonstop by the end of the season. I felt like they ran out of guys. So in some ways, I feel like, okay, he's probably going to upgrade his targets in Miami relative to the competition that he's facing. But then I also look at Miami's depth chart, and I am going to need your help to sort this out because they lose Restrepo, Horton, George, and Sam Brown, which is, what do you call it, about 270 targets last year.
They're top 4 wide receivers, right?
And Arroyo's gone.
And Arroyo. And Damian Martinez, their running back, I think was their 6th leading receiver by reception. So they got to replace their top 6. And they went out in the portal, and they've added a few players there. Nothing dynamic like the players that they are replacing, but they're seniors that are proven production guys, 500-yard type guys. CJ Daniels from LSU, who was productive at Liberty. Keelan Marion, a BYU kind of Swiss Army knife. You use him on jet sweeps type of guy. What can he be as a receiver? That's something he has to prove this year at Miami, that he can be a receiver. And then they went out and added Tony Johnson too, kind of a slot receiver who's went to FAU as a walk-on and just kind of grinded his way to Cincinnati and producing at a solid level at Cincinnati last year, and now he's at Miami. So they feel like they know what they got from those 3 guys in terms of, okay, they're veterans, they're mature, they're essentially pro mentality guys. What can they give us production-wise? It's good enough. It's solid. What Miami needs, and honestly, this is similar at a lot of different position groups. They need one of their young guys that they signed out of high school that's talented but unproven. They need that timeline to start clicking in this year, and that would be JoJo Trader, who was a top 50, top 100 recruit coming out of high school. Got dinged up a lot last year as a true freshman. I don't know if he would have played anyways, just because they had so much there at receiver anyways, but he got hurt. That's why he didn't really see the field. He did see the field in the bowl game, and he made a play. He finished with 60 yards and a touchdown, I think, in that limited action in the bowl game. So, and he had a strong spring. Now, he did get dinged up in the spring again. So injuries are kind of something to monitor with him, just in terms of his ability to stay healthy. It's never anything serious or major, but just he gets dinged up a lot. So if he can kind of be the most talented guy and produce, it would be huge for this offense. Also, too, early enrollee true freshman who reclassified from the 26 class, Malachi Toney, was probably their most impressive receiver during the month of spring football. Is he going to be ready as a 17-year-old true freshman? That's to be determined, but Miami kind of went out and added these veteran guys to make sure they didn't have to totally depend on a Malachi Toney. And then you mentioned Elijah Arroyo. Elijah Lofton is, a much different type of tight end, but he is a freak show athlete in his own way. He's like a 6'2", 235 H-back type of tight end that you can line up all over the place, and he's going to play a significant role in this offense too. So is it going to be like a super explosive offense like it was last year in the passing game? No. But can it be efficient and, productive still in that way? I think it can be, as long as, because Carson Beck's playing behind a good offensive line. He should have plenty of time to operate. And so it's a step back year over year at receiver, but I still think it's a pretty solid group.
You mentioned that offensive line, which was really good last year. They lose Rivers to the NFL. Carpenter graduates. I don't know if he got drafted or not. I don't know, but a decent college center, I guess. Not quite what they had 2 years ago with the UCF kid. But in looking at this, they take a couple transfers. Do they have the potential to be better than what they were last year?
I think the potential's there. They still have to go out and prove it. So Jalen Rivers was a very solid college left tackle. At the NFL level, he's probably a guy that kicks inside. He dealt with an injury that kept him out for maybe 5 weeks last year. And that proved to be somewhat of a blessing in disguise because it allowed Markel Bell to just insert himself into the starting left tackle job. He arrived last year as a raw JUCO addition, freak show body type, 6'9", 340 pounds, crazy long arms, crazy wingspan, but very raw technique-wise. And those 5 games, he really kind of got his feet under him. And when Jalen came back, they were kind of just splitting time at left tackle. So he's now the starting left tackle. Then left guard, they return Matthew McCoy. At center, they add James Brockermeyer from TCU, who was a starter there last year. He's got 1 year of eligibility left. And they liked what they saw to him in the spring. Right guard's Inez Cooper, who's going to be a 4-year starter for Miami this year. And then Francis Mauigoa, the right tackle, getting a lot of first-round pick buzz for these early, mock drafts. He's in his 3rd year now. Across the board, they look the part. They're all 6'5", 6'6". They're all 300 plus, right? So it's a pretty looking group. They have depth as well. I think they can be potentially Mario's best offensive line at Miami. Would I lock that in yet? No, because I still think a lot of those guys still need to take a step forward.
At running back, you lose Damon Martinez, who went for 1,000 yards. Mark Fletcher ended up being a real, I know this time last year we were like, is he going to recover from the injury that he had against, was it Rutgers in the 23 bowl game?
Yep.
But you get they signed Jordan Lyle out of high school, who I thought was a really nice back. Wheatley Humphrey has some interesting some interesting skills there, like the speed mainly.
Yeah.
And then they get this Shamar Brown kid, who I don't know a ton about. How do you see this backfield shaking out? Is there a possibility we have an actual bell cow this year?
That's a fair question. I think ideally they would like it to be Mark Fletcher, but that's something that just has to be sorted out via performance. Can Mark Fletcher be your RB1? I think he's shown he's a very good complementary back, 500 plus yards each of the last 2 years. This is his first offseason, healthy offseason, or I should say full offseason at the college level, because he was not an early enrollee in high school. He arrived in the summer, and then last year, like you said, he was recovering from his injury. So he's in the best shape of his life right now. We'll see if it translates to being, that explosive potential type of running back. I think Jordan Lyle has that explosive potential. Is he ready to be RB1? That's going to be interesting. Regardless, that's a strong 1-2 punch, however it plays out. And then I think RB3 is locked in with Shamar Brown, who comes from North Dakota State, was the Jerry Rice Award winner last year, which is the top freshman at the FCS level, 1,100 yards. He's not, I don't think he's as talented as those two guys, Fletcher and Lyle, but he's kind of your steady 4 yards a pop type of running back. Perfect RB3, in my opinion, that can just come in, do the job, keep the chains moving, probably be effective in the red zone too, because he is kind of a bigger back. So those are your top 3 backs, and then after that it's kind of a drop off, to be honest.
Is there a guy who we have not mentioned yet on this offense who maybe kind of two sides of the coin here? Either he plays to his potential a year before than we collectively expect, or on the flip side, maybe he finally reaches his potential after a lot of us have kind of written off, what he is. That would really change the outlook for this offense.
For me, the guy, like I said, to me, the X factor is JoJo Trader. If JoJo Trader can be wide receiver 1, that's huge for this offense, because he gives you that explosive potential on the outside. I think the question with JoJo Trader is, does that happen this year or does that happen next year? And so the answer to that question will kind of determine the explosive potential of the offense. In terms of like maybe a newcomer, a freshman, Josh Moore might be someone to keep an eye on. He flashed a lot in the spring, but he is a freshman. He's raw, but he's 6'4", 210 pounds, really impressive physical traits, a lot of potential there. Is he ready to put it all together and produce now? We'll see. But he might be a guy that, during camp, maybe it just all comes together and it's like, man, this guy's too good to keep off the field. But I would circle JoJo Trader as that guy.
All right, let's go ahead and hit a break here. On the flip side, we'll keep going inside the U with David Lake on this Canes defense.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
And we're back here on the Cover 3 College Ball Podcast, Summer School Edition, talking all things Miami with Inside the U's David Lake, frequent guest on our show. We love it. I see David a lot in person as well. Super sharp dude. And David, I think the question is, with somewhat of a drop-off probably projected on offense, given Cam Ward was kind of unreal, and the receiving core was like all drafted, with the exception of Restrepo, which is crazy to me because I feel like, he's a slot receiver and he proved he can play slot. I know what he ran, but I think he's a good player. Can the defense improve enough to offset the loss that you have on offense some? And to help them do that, they bring in a new coordinator, Corey Heatherman, from Minnesota. So I guess top level, how will this look different because of Heatherman, moving on from Guidry, and how will this look different because of personnel?
Yeah, the buzzwords in terms of just Heatherman's scheme, what he wants to see from his defense, the buzzwords were just simplify and play fast. I think last year, they felt like a lot of the players too, they kind of all felt like it was, up front on the defensive line, a lot of twist game, a lot of stunt game, which kind of took away from the strength of the type of athletes that Miami recruits on the defensive line. Just get upfield, play vertical, create havoc in the backfield. And last year's approach kind of took away that ability. Also on the back end, in the back seven, it was just far too often where Miami was misaligned pre-snap and then post-snap just straight up confused in terms of like what assignments were for, the players. So Corey Heatherman's come in, and his approach is he's going to be simplifying things, because he wants these guys to play fast and let their athleticism show. I think, this isn't a perfect like for like comparison, but if I'm going to boil this down to a Miami Hurricanes fan, to something that they could know, I would say, maybe it's like a Manny Diaz kind of approach up front with the D line and just getting after it. But a little more less aggressive and taking chances on the back end, like Manny Diaz's defenses did. So I think the players really liked it. I know Mario's excited about how this defense could marry to its personnel. And yeah, from a personnel standpoint, there's a lot to get into. I'll let you lead that conversation because at each level, there's new players and storylines to cover because they hit the portal quite hard on the defensive side to kind of flip the results there year over year.
I assume he came recommended by Schiano, who Mario would know pretty well. And typically Minnesota has played, like, as you said, just like we watched a lot of Minnesota. Watched a lot of all the teams, but talked to Ryan Burns a lot, and they're just like, do not allow the explosive plays, and we'll figure it out the rest of the way. Which is kind of something. Obviously, if Miami had allowed a few less explosives last year, things would have been different. Probably could have wrote the Gamer or the Cal game, Cal story before 2 a.m. Right? I don't know what time you got to bed that night, but that was a wild one. So up front, David, they lose Tyler Barron, who ended up being really good for them. I mean, 10 sacks, 25 stops. Barrow was like the numbers.
Good.
Yeah, the numbers for him were better than I realized they were. And then CJ Clark. I think Clark played more than I thought he would play. For them, I guess. The rest of the guys they lose, Alston, not a huge impact guy.
Got hurt. Yeah.
Marley Cook, and then Campbell didn't play really at all. How do they replace Barron and Barrow?
So I think the hope with Barron, who played defensive end, I think the hope is just you get a healthy Ruben Bain this year, because last year Ruben Bain sustained a hamstring injury on, I think it was like the third play of the Florida game, the season opener. And from that point on, the season was a struggle for him. That's a difficult injury to try and come back from. You kind of just that hamstring injury, you just got to take time off and let it heal, which he did. I mean, he took 4 games off, but still coming back from that just didn't quite look like the true freshman Ruben Bain. So his focus this offseason has been shedding some weight, getting that twitch back a little bit. And he was down, I think last year he played closer to 280. I think at the end of spring camp, he was in that 265 to 270 range. So he was, and I think he still wanted to get down to like 260 by the start of the year. So he felt better. He says and look, when Ruben Bain, even last year, he still impacts games. I think what was missing last year with Ruben was turning pressures into sacks. He just he'd pressure, but couldn't quite finish on the play. So that's the goal for him this year. They feel like Akeem Mesidor is kind of your solid, steady veteran. He's, played a bunch of years at the college level. You know what you're going to get there. And then, the backups, the rotation guys, because you need, multiple DNs to navigate a season. Armando Blunt, 5-star recruit, freshman last year. They feel like he took a huge step this offseason, and he's ready to contribute in that rotation type of way. Also, Marquise Lightfoot, who was kind of, frankly, a surprise during the spring. He was a 5-star recruit, but didn't maybe make the strongest first impression last spring as an early enrollee freshman, but he's kind of putting it all together, and they like what they have in him now. So they feel good about those top 4. D-tackle, they went out and added David Blay from Louisiana Tech. That's a step up in competition, but to me, he kind of has the body type to do it. That's always a concern there with those guys that take that step. But I think he can do it. And then they like Ahmad Moten a lot. He's a guy with a lot of potential. He's a guy with a lot of nastiness to his game that, frankly, he needs to rein in sometimes. But it's kind of his job right now. And then Justin Scott, another 5-star second-year player. It's a lot of second-year players. Miami needs these guys to step up to bump up that ceiling of what they can be on offense and defense. But Justin Scott really impressed during the month of spring football, totally changed his body year over year. And there's big expectations for Justin Scott there on the interior. The fourth D tackle, I think, is kind of up in the air. Artavius Jones, I think, might be the guy to keep an eye on in that fourth defensive tackle role. And but overall, they do feel good about what they have on the defensive line. But they need those young guys in particular to kind of continue that trajectory they showed in the spring. It was encouraging, but you got to do it in the fall.
So at linebacker, Maui Noah's gone, but Basainth played, fairly well last year. Alderman, former Louisville transfer. Is it those two guys, or is there somebody else we need to keep an eye on?
So they went out in the spring. They evaluated things during the month of spring football. Wesley Basainth locked in as a guy that's at least a rotation player. I think he's going to have to compete for playing time, honestly, because they went out and added Mo Torre from Rutgers, who played with Hetherman, under Hetherman, when Hetherman was a linebackers coach at Rutgers. He's coming off his second ACL, so that's a concern. Miami in their evaluation, they feel good about it. So if he is able to be, anywhere close to what he was at Rutgers back in 2023, they've addressed their middle linebacker situation in a significant way, because that was a huge need. And when you start the year with Notre Dame, you're going to have a good middle linebacker. Yeah. And then, in week, 4-3, they play Florida. You're going to need that middle linebacker again. So they're keeping their fingers crossed that everything's good there with Mo Torre. And then they went out and added Kamal Bonner from NC State, kind of your outside linebacker that's athletic and coverage, 6'2", nice length. So he'll play on the outside there and rotate with Wesley Basainth. And then probably the fourth guy is Popo Aguirre, who took a step forward last year, got nicked up, dealt with some injuries, so he missed some time. And Jalen Alderman kind of played more than him because of that. But those would probably be your top four right now. But to me, they needed to go out and address linebacker in the portal. I think they did that as well as you could in the spring window, because there's just not much there. If Mo Torre is, 85, 90% of what he was in 2023, that's a big win for this defense.
All right, now we've saved some time for this because this is going to take a minute. So, DB, Powell, Harris, Porter, Hill, Stafford, Patterson, Washington are the guys who played any actual snaps who are gone, which is a ton. Now, I think it's fair to ask, are those actually losses? Maybe some of them are, but maybe some of them are not so much.
It was a bad group. It was a bad group in terms of performance last year, and that's what we're judging them on, right? How they perform. Just too inconsistent. And so, I think Nish Powell flashed some playmaking potential, but then there was other times where it just wasn't up to the standard. So they went out and totally flipped this group. They do return O.J. Frederick, who was a true freshman starter last year, by far their best DB last year. So they return him. He's going to be a starting corner. They feel good about him. But then they went out and added 7 transfers at DB. One already left in Emmanuel Carnley. So it's 6 new guys in the secondary right now, led by Xavier Lucas, who, I think is a cornerback one. He wowed everyone in the spring with what he could do. He came from Wisconsin. Of course, that was a contentious deal with how that went down. But he's locked in as a cornerback starter to me with O.J. Frederick. They went out and got Ethan O'Connor from Washington State to be kind of your next rotational corner on the outside there, 6'1" guy with, I believe, 4 picks last year at Washington State. Charles Brantley, kind of a, undersized slot, but feisty, or nickel, I should say, but feisty guy in there. They solidified that spot with some size in Keontae Scott from from Houston via Auburn. He went to Houston in the winter window because his coach at Auburn was Zach Etheridge. Zach Etheridge gets hired at Miami, so he follows him in the spring. So he's going to help at nickel quite a bit. And then their two safeties are going to be new. Their transfers in Zechariah Poyser from Jacksonville State, who, was highly rated by our guys at 24/7 in the portal rankings, and he definitely impressed in the month of spring football. They feel good about that. And then in the spring window, they went out and added Jacoby Thomas, who, was a rotational guy at Tennessee. It seemed like he might have been in line to be a starter at Tennessee this year, and he hit the portal, and Miami was able to add him. So totally new looking group. Frankly, it's just a more talented group than it was last year. Last year's group wasn't overly talented, didn't look the part much at all across the board, in my opinion. This group at least looks the part, and they have produced and have production and talent. And so, in theory, the results should improve there in the secondary year over year.
For sure. All right. So this schedule does not open softly. Like Beck's going to need to be on point in game one facing the Irish. At least it's in the heat of South Florida. Was that an August game, or is that actually September?
It's the Sunday Labor Day weekend, so I think it's technically August still.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, that's going to be, well, we both know that's going to be hot as hell.
Yeah.
And then a nice reprieve with Bethune. You get USF at home. Brown, I did the USF summer school yesterday. Brown, the quarterback, is back, but obviously it's still a G5 team. Host Florida in Hard Rock, and then a bye at a rebuilt FSU team. We'll see what they are. Another bye week. So it's interesting, a bye before and after FSU. And then kind of a tricky, I don't know how you want to label this, but it's sort of, okay, Miami, prove to me that you're not going to lose one of these ACC games. You shouldn't stretch, right? To finish the year. Louisville at home, Stanford at home, which that should be a gimme. They've lost a lot. On the road at SMU, host Cuse, host NC State, at the Hokies, and at Pitt to finish. How would you define success for this Miami team in 25?
Yeah, like you're alluding to, it's very front-loaded schedule. If we're just talking about the biggest brands on the schedule, they're all on that front end. So they do have to navigate that situation. Like you said, too, there's a couple of buys in between those ACC openers with Florida State and Louisville. So in theory, you should be able to handle those games. In theory, games aren't played on paper, though. Look, in my opinion, Miami's season will be defined successfly if they get to Charlotte in the ACC championship game. And what does that mean from a record perspective overall? 9-3, 10-2, I don't know. But to me, the more important number is you have to go at least 7-1 in the ACC to get to Charlotte. And that's been something that's eluded Miami, since joining the ACC. And, this is an issue that predates Mario Cristobal. They had it in their grasp last year and fumbled it away. They went 6-2 in the conference last year. So you got to go 7-1, I think, at least in conference play. And look, but I don't know if you agree with this, but when you look on paper, just the way things are looking in the ACC landscape, Clemson, Miami are kind of a tier above everyone else. And honestly, I think the gap is kind of wide if you're just talking about total roster, two deeps, top to bottom.
I do too. Yeah.
So there's really, what I'm getting at is there's no excuse for Miami to not get to Charlotte this year. And I think, now it's not 100% certainty, you get to Charlotte, you're probably in the 12-team playoff as one of, obviously the winner gets in. I think second place probably gets in too, probably. So that's why I say just getting to Charlotte, doing that for only the second time it would be if Miami's able to do that. So it is kind of a step forward the program needs to make, quite frankly. The water cooler games of Notre Dame and Florida, those games matter. They're fun to talk about. But if we're talking about getting to the college football playoff, if we're being real, Miami has to handle business in the ACC.
I agree with that. I do think there is a scenario in which the playoff is, still pretty alive if they get one of the two non-cons. But you need to go 2-1 against the three teams that the odds makers say are really battling for that second spot, right? Which would be Louisville, at SMU, and at FSU. And if you get 2-1 there, you have the head-to-heads, right? Mm-hmm. In theory, unless the one is an unfortunate one, which I guess technically if you lose it, the chances are that team's probably the best of those three. But the Stanford, Cuse, NC State, at Vodtech, at Pitt. If you go 2-1 against the former, you can afford to slip up. I think most likely and still make it to Charlotte. But obviously, like Miami fans wouldn't be happy with that, nor should they.
They have to navigate a season, and that's just something they haven't done since joining the ACC. I've been doing this, so we started the website in 2007. On paper, this is probably the best roster top to bottom that I've covered. Just every position group, depth-wise, talent-wise. It's not a perfect roster, but it's the best one I think I've covered overall. And so it's time to get it done and get to Charlotte.
We will see, David. I'll see you soon. Maybe down at IMG pretty soon. And take care, man.
Thanks, bud.